Singularity.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Singularity One-on-One. Singularity One-on-One is a podcast feature of Singularity weblog, where you can go and listen to it or download it in full. As you may already know, my name is Nicola, aka Socrates, and as always, I will be the man with the questions. Today, my guest on the show will be Steven Kotler. Steven is most recently the co-author of a very interesting book called Abundance, which he wrote together with Peter Diamandis. So, without further ado, hi Steven and welcome to Singularity One-on-One.
Hi Nicola, how are you?
Very well, thank you. And I'm incredibly happy that you managed to fit us into your busy daily routine. Now, I think you're running a dog sanctuary there, so we might have a lot of fun doing this interview. And perhaps one of the first questions should be, can you tell us a little bit about the dog sanctuary? And I saw already a bunch of dogs around you.
Yeah, I think there's about, 9 or 10 somewhere in my office right now. 6 years ago, my wife and I co-founded the Rancho de Chihuahua Dog Sanctuary in northern New Mexico. We specialize in special needs dogs and hospice cases. We kind of like to work with the worst of the worst, the last stop on the train of misery, as we say. But I think we're one of the only sanctuaries in America that has a healing methodology based on cognitive neuroscience and evolutionary psychology. We do things a little differently here, but it's super interesting and super fun.
Now, I have to go back a little bit and say that I just did a great disfavor to Steven because I greatly shortened his personal bio. And perhaps it's time to remedy that by starting a little bit further back in time with your own personal story. So, Steven, how did you become a writer to begin with? When did your interest in writing develop?
Oh, my mother taught me to read. I was writing poetry by 4. That's all I ever wanted to do. All I've ever done is put words together in a straight line. Never really had another job.
So you've always been a writer?
I came out of graduate school. I was a bartender through college and I was a magician from the time I was 11 to the time I was 21. Did professional magic, prestidigitation, birthday parties and bar mitzvahs and that kind of stuff. Until I learned how to bartended my way through grad school and came out of grad school, and all I wanted to do was write books. And I had to figure out how, I knew it was going to take me a while till I was going to get paid to write books. And I was trying to get a job in advertising, and nobody was going to hire me because I had long dreadlocks and I looked really strange. And this was the 80s when advertising agencies liked double-breasted suits and they wanted to look like Wall Street. Nobody was going to hire this weird-looking guy with dreadlocks. And I was in an interview, and the guy I was interviewing had to go to a meeting, and he threw a copy of a magazine called Bikini in my lap. It was the inaugural issue, it was the first issue. And Bikini was the precursor to Maxim or Loaded or FHM or all those magazines that came out a lot earlier in LA, and this was the debut issue. And I was sitting in this guy's office reading this thing, and I read an article, and I went, I can do this. And I stole this magazine, and I went home, and I called the editor-in-chief every hour on the hour for 4 days straight until he took my call. And then I faxed him. I'd never written a magazine article in my life, so he got my college term papers. He got, I think the first half of my novel. Anything I could fax this guy, I faxed him. And, he called me up later. He said, well, you got chutzpah. Noe Gold was his name. And he said, but I don't think I have any work for you. And that was the end of that. And 2 days later, he called me back. He went, oh, no, I think I do have an assignment for you. And it was a story about a kid who was going to jail on Monday, and it was Friday, and if I could get the story before he went to jail, I had a job. So I got the story, and
got a job.
That was it snowballed from there. Once somebody paid me to write, I wasn't going to let go.
Okay, and then you found yourself writing for Maxim?
Oh, I've written, I think, for probably 70 different publications at this point. I helped start Maxim, I helped start FHM. I was on staff at GQ. I worked for Variety for a long time. I was in Wired very, very early on, did a lot of stuff along the way. I was in San Francisco at the start of the internet revolution, so I worked on one of the first online magazines and things like that. So I was a little bit of part of that scene. And I kind of gone from there.
That's totally fascinating. So you've been involved in all those publications, but let me go a little back again. Like, what did you take in grad school, or in school in generally, in university and then in
Yeah,
grad school?
my undergraduate degree is in English and creative writing, and my master's is in creative writing.
Oh, I see. So that's exactly on your topic. So as you said before, you've been wanting to be a writer all your life. So I guess it makes total sense that you would go and study creative writing, for example. Yeah, and then what happened after getting involved in Maxim and all those? How did you write your first book, and what was that all about?
My first novel is it was a novel, and it it's about four people trying to break into the Vatican to steal a book that was a book about Kabbalistic mysticism that was stolen from the Jews in the 13th century. So the first book is about Kabbalistic mysticism and the consequences of mystical questing in a contemporary society. Things along those lines. I've always been very deeply interested in philosophy and religion and spirituality and the ideas that circle around that. And so the first book was a novel that deep dove right into that.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. And then how does the story go on so that you get involved with Singularity University, Peter Diamandis,
Well,
and
I
yeah, yeah.
so That's a fun story, by the way. This was in 1987. I was in the Black Rock Desert. I was doing a rocket science. No, I was doing a story for GQ magazine on Craig Breedlove, who was trying to drive the speed of sound in a car. And Craig Breedlove was competing against kind of basically the British Navy, right? It was like a guy in his garage with a handful of mechanics versus the British Navy. And Breedlove was doing okay. And his head mechanic was a guy named Dejer Molnar, who was one of the craziest, most interesting engineers guys I've ever met in my life. And he was just a maverick engineer. And we were drinking in the bar one night in Gerlach, this little tiny town. And I said, Farah, we're on the air. And I said, okay, so what's the craziest? Yeah, I said, you're one of the craziest guys I've ever met. What's the craziest thing you know of? He said, oh, there's this guy named Peter Diamandis who wants to have a prize to send people into space. And I went, oh, wow, that's interesting. So I finished that story for GQ, and the next thing I did was a big X Prize story. And it was it announced the X Prize, but it was the first big story about the prize that really looked at the teams and actually really kind of took it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter and I just got to know each other, and we got along really, really well. And he liked my writing, and we kept in touch. I did a lot of X Prize stories over the years for a lot of different publications, and we worked on a couple other projects together. And then essentially, when the X Prize went from space to the betterment of mankind, when he made that transition, Peter and I kind of lost touch with each other. He became very close friends with Dejer Molnar as well.
Mm-hmm.
I introduced them, and they ended up being really good friends. So I kept tabs on Peter through Dejer, and I always knew what was going on. But we hadn't talked, and I'll kind of just tell you the story of how abundance happened, because this is basically where we are. I had moved out here, started a dog sanctuary, and was working a lot with animals. I just finished my last book, which was called The Small Furry Prayer, which was on the relationship between humans and animals. And I had been spending a lot of time thinking about biodiversity, thinking about how do you protect animals. I've been a long-time animal geek and a long-time environmental writer. And would do these. It was more and more. It was more and more of it was coming into my life, and I've been really thinking about, how do you protect ecosystem services? How do you stave off the sixth grade extinction? These were really deep and hard issues for me, and I started. I heard something early on about in vitro meat, and I'd always also been very interested in agricultural technologies. All kinds of alternative farming methods those were really interesting things. How do you protect the soil and the land and things like that? I paid a lot of attention to that. And let me back up a bit. The only way to actually protect biodiversity, and we know this, and the whole world knows this, is you need migration corridors. You need massive swatches of contiguous wildlands, like the Yellowstone to Yukon project. So if you need to turn massive swatches of contiguous wildlands over to animals and you need to get the humans off them, the only way to do it is to get the farm animals off the land. You have to move the farms. And the combination of in vitro meat, some of the GE technology, I wasn't really paying much attention to this at the time, but in vitro meat and vertical farms seemed to me the best possible way. And I was thinking about these things, and I was thinking about a couple other, things along these lines. And as I was thinking about these things, I was like, okay, well, this is great. I don't have enough weight to write this story. I just don't have the environment. I'm not a PhD in environmental science. I can do this as a journalist, but to write this as a book, nobody's going to read it. And I wasn't quite sure, how to do that. I was thinking about how to solve that problem. And I had a book I really wanted to write. And as I was thinking about this, the phone rang, and it was Peter. And he said, hey, I've got this book project I want to bring you in on. And he told me about it. And it was essentially the other, half of my book. It was everything else that kind of surrounded the biodiversity, the animal, the things I'd been thinking about. And Peter just had this bigger frame that my ideas slotted right into. And we fought a little bit. We had massive, huge disagreements, especially about overpopulation. It took him a very, 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 very long time to show me enough data to make me believe that raising basic standards of living could actually impact population in a way. Because that's the other thing. If you care about biodiversity, you need less people. It has to be less people, more animals. And that was really important to me. And so those were the two pieces when, once Peter kind of showed me enough data about biodiversity, all the other stuff, I'd read Ray's book. I understood exponentially growing technology. This wasn't, that wasn't new. I've been a tech writer for a really long time. So these things made sense. And Peter slotted a couple other things into place. And, we built this frame, and I went, you know what, this could work. And, it kind of went from there.
That's a very fascinating story. I especially love the part where you argued about all those major points in the book, because that's kind of the most creative process, I believe.
I will tell you, there's another side of the story that's just a really fascinating story, and I want to tell it because it's equally important. The other thing two other things happened that during those arguments. One is my background. My primarily background as a science writer is neuroscience and psychology and cognitive psych and behavioral neuroscience and all these things, right? And so as soon as, I had been spending a real long time, and I've written a number of books about, how perception shapes reality, how belief shapes reality, how, we basically live in a world of our own creation. There's no there. And, a lot of people know this. And I started realizing when Peter and I were talking about the good news and are we moving towards all this kind of stuff, I started simultaneously looking into, this became chapter 3 of the book, but looking into the neuroscience. Okay, why do I have a hard time believing Peter? Because some of the things he would say, I would just have an instinctive bad reaction to. And, whenever I have a really powerful emotion, you look at that. You're like, okay, I'm being given some information here. What's this about? And I started poking at it. And, not only did I, kind of start uncovering Kahneman's cognitive biases, which I knew about, but I started realizing, how much your brain basically blocks out good news. And it was, when I started really looking at the data, it was an astounding amount, and and in very peculiar ways. One of the things that's what I'm really proud of in the book that's a bit of original thinking is psychologists have known for a while that we are what's local optimists. We overestimate our attractiveness, our intelligence, our charisma, our chances of winning the lottery, our chances of not getting fired or cancer, whatever, this stuff, right? And it's called the psychological immune system. There's a flip side to the psychological immune system that nobody had really looked at, which is, while we're local optimists, we're global pessimists. Meaning, if I ask you, for example, and a lot of it has to do with control, but let me give you a really simple example. If I say, get a better grade in math, well, you can imagine hiring a tutor, partying less. You can see how to do it. It makes sense, and you're overconfident because you've got the psychological immune system, right? And you just say, okay, I can do it. I can get a better grade in math. But if I say, solve world hunger, what happens is the first thing that you think of is all these starving children. That becomes your anchor point. So the anchoring bias kicks in, and it crowds out all other thoughts, and you can't even begin to imagine it. You feel helpless and doomed and pessimistic. even before you've even begun thinking about the problem. So even what I started to realize is just trying to think about these global problems, we had problems with. There were psychological problems with. That was a big breakthrough. That was one of the other things that came together for me along population. But the third thing, and this is the story I wanted to tell you a little bit ago, is I had gotten hired to investigate small-scale nuclear reactors for an article, for a magazine article.
Wow.
Backyard nukes, as they call them. And this was when they were just started to come out, and a lot of the neat stuff that's going on with these technologies was going on in New Mexico, where I am. Now, I'm a longtime environmental writer. I've got lots of connections in the environmental movements. And, it's nukes. And I'm a good liberal, so I instantly hate nukes. And I'm like, oh, this technology is going to suck. And, and I know it. And I go out and I call my environmental friends. And sure enough, I mean, and by the way, these are top experts. Guys,
They tell you what you want to hear.
well, they tell me the same thing. They tell me all about the technology, all of it. And, and I'm convinced we have a real problem. And I'm all set to write this article, and I have to fact check something. And I can't find a source at Los Alamos, and I end up calling a retired Argonne National Laboratory guy. And I don't even tell him anything about small-scale nuclear reactors or my story. I just ask him a question, and he gives me an answer. And I realize as he's giving me this answer that if he's telling the truth, everything I just heard from the world's leading experts on nukes, the guys who were going on television talking about why nukes are bad, was a lie. And I didn't think these guys were lying intentionally, but if this was true, everything else I've been told was crap. And I went, holy shit, I got to look into this. And, did, and quickly realized very simply that every single one of the experts I knew on nuclear power had stopped learning at the China Syndrome. When 3 Mile Island melted down, that was as far as the technology had gotten in their mind, and they had never paid attention after that. So they knew nothing about Generation 4 technology at all. And what I was learning about Generation 4 technology was astounding, and it really blew my mind. So I wrote a big story about it that's called "Meltdown or Motherload," and I remember I got a note from Stuart Brand, where it said, a note thanking me and telling me that I got it right, and this was before he published his book, and I didn't even. And Stuart had been a longtime hero of mine, so to get a note from Stuart telling me that my work on nuclear power was important and I was right. I was like, okay, what else, technologically has been dismissed, that I should pay attention to? So all these three things came together right when Peter and I, were working on abundance. And I also had, once you kind of look at fourth generation nuclear power, global warming, climate, some of these really massive intractable problems, seem a little more solvable because it's such a powerful technology, and there are a number of versions of it, and it's here today, and can be scaled up type of thing. This was very eye-opening.
And I presume all of this happened before the Fukushima accident.
It did. And I mean, by the way, Fukushima, if they would have had Generation 4 technology, wouldn't have happened, right? Generation 4 technology, I don't know what you know about it, but it can't melt down. The laws of physics prohibit it from being able to melt down, right? It can't sustain a reaction as it gets that hot, so it shuts itself down. And by the way, the reason we know this works is in Idaho, they ran the experiment. They duplicated everything that happened on 3 Mile Island with this technology. They literally unplugged the reactor from the wall, and it shut itself off, right? We've done this in tests. We know it works. So I wrote some additional stuff after that happened in Japan, because it was the worst. I mean, it was the worst kind of disaster at the worst time. Though I do think, and I've been pretty frustrated with the Obama administration. They've supported nuclear power, great, but they're supporting Generation 2, Generation 3 nuclear power, which is the stupidest thing I can possibly imagine. So I'm on a certain level, I'm hoping that what happened in Japan was a wake-up call that it's time to really pay attention to Gen 4 and just leave these outdated technologies alone.
Just to make sure, because I'm not an expert in the field at all, but I've seen a couple of documentaries recently. Is Generation 4 the thorium-based reactors?
Well, there's a couple of different kinds. There's traveling wave reactors. Thorium is one of the Generation 4 technologies. Thorium is a hugely interesting technology.
And
mostly it came out of Oak Ridge, Argonne, developed a slightly different technology, but
Mm-hmm.
those are the two kind of core things. And I like the fact that they're competing, and Nathan Marvell's traveling wave reactor is kind of a third variation in
Yeah.
there. Um, I think I like the competition. I think the best technology is going to start to emerge. I'd like us to start working on it here in America. They're certainly doing interesting things, starting to.
Bill Gates is a huge supporter there.
Yeah, I think the fact that Nathan Marvell got involved, there are a lot of people who think he's one of the smartest people in the world, and
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. But let's get back on topic here, which is, of course, your book, Abundance. So before we dive into the book, let me challenge you by setting up a context, and you tell me where I'm wrong. And that's the context that I often have to address myself. So let's see. Turn on the TV. Everywhere you look around, people dying, environmental disasters, wars of increasing, the Middle East is exploding, environmental degradation, global warming, the polar caps are melting at a faster pace than ever. I think this summer we had the biggest ever melting in the Northwest Passage, north of Canada. And of course, the world is ending at the end of 2012. So, everything, everywhere you look around, people are losing their pensions, their 401ks, or their livelihoods. They're made redundant by machines or by outsourcing the production in China and so on. How in the world can we say that there's an abundance when we see that all over the place around us, on news, on the internet, and on TV, on radio, everywhere?
Okay, so there's two different answers I'm going to give you. And thank you for asking that question, actually. It's a great question. The first thing is I just want to talk about jobs in the economy for a second. I'm a writer. I'm a magazine journalist, primarily. This is a industry that is supported almost entirely, by advertising, which no longer exists, and publishing. I've had to reinvent my career literally 3 times in the past decade, 3 different ways to feed my family. So, in 2007, I made less money than I made when I was 22 years old. After, literally, you know what I mean? This is not a crisis that I am unaffected by. And by the way, the flip side is I run a dog sanctuary. The vast majority of animals in my care came from somebody who lost their home, got thrown out of it, and couldn't keep their animal. And now, you know what I mean? I'm on the front lines of that as well. So I see that stuff. And, all the crises you're talking about, the first thing I want to say is we're not dismissing them. We're making 2 points. The first point is, yes, there is a tremendous amount of bad news. We face grand challenges right now. Are they worse today than they ever have been before in history? I have no way to answer that question. I don't think there is a way. I think what is true is that we are way more aware of them because of, the internet, because of 500 channels of cable, et cetera, et cetera. So we're certainly more overwhelmed by them than we ever have before. Worse or better. We make a number of points. First off, by almost any quality of life metric you choose, life now is significantly, massively better than it was 100 years ago in shocking ways. And in ways that is the economy in tatters? Yes. But are groceries 13 times cheaper than they were 150 years ago? Yes. Human lifespan has increased by 100% in the past century. Child mortality has dropped by 90%, maternal mortality by 99%. The vast majority in America of the poorest of the poor have running water, flush toilets, air conditioning, a car, a television. These are luxuries that, the richest of the rich couldn't even have dreamed of 100 years ago. That said, abundance is not about a world of abundance today. What we are saying in the book is there are 4 emerging forces right now that should allow us to significantly raise global standards of living over the next 2 to 3 decades. That's what abundance means. Four emerging forces that are putting so much power in the hands of individuals that we can triumph over these challenges and meet and exceed the basic needs of every man, woman, and child on earth. Basic needs. We're talking about food, water, some degree of personal freedom, access to health care, access to education, those shelter, those kinds of things. We're not talking about Trump Towers, Mercedes-Benz. What we're talking about is getting the chance to live a life of possibility, giving everybody on earth a chance to try to make something great of themselves. That's what we're talking about here. And the other point, the other thing that I want to talk about, there's been a lot of global warming talk lately, for very, very good reason. Crisis is very, very, very significant. But most of the technologies and the forces that we discuss in abundance provide some of our best chances against global warming. This is a giant crisis, and we have to rally together. But the technologies that are at our disposal are increasingly powerful, and I do believe we can solve it.
Okay, so let me grab a couple of points of what you just said here, and see where that takes us. So first of all, you said that our standards of living have increased substantially for the last 100 years, and for example, the grocery bills have decreased by a factor of 13. But what if somebody tells you, well, for the last 20 or 30 years, say from the late 70s or 80s up until now, I feel that all my bills have gotten up, I feel that I'm making less money than ever before, and I feel that my kids are going to have a lower standard of living than my parents or me.
Well, the thing that you're missing on this, let's just pick healthcare, right? Healthcare is a great way to start, and I just want to talk about some of the technologies and how they're working, and I really kind of want to start with the Qualcomm X Prize, the Tricorder X Prize, which is a great way to start. So, as most people know, Watson was IBM's computer that played on Jeopardy, right? So after Watson beat Jeopardy, the great advantage of Watson is understood natural language, right? Massive brain access to all kinds of other materials, but understands natural language. What did they do with Watson after Jeopardy? They sent Watson to medical school, right? They're basically trying to build a board-certified doctor AI. That AI is going to get put into the cloud. When you combine a cloud-based diagnostic AI with the tricorder technology, which basically takes spit, blood, or urine and analyzes it, it's a cell phone device that analyzes, your spit, blood, or urine for, a whole host of things, gets hooked up into the cloud, attached to Watson, and suddenly your cell phone is your doctor. That is a massive, massive, massive quality of life breakthrough. It's going to significantly drop the cost of healthcare, and it's going to be available to anybody with a cell phone, which are technologies that are already, right, 70% cell phone penetration by the end of 2013. Globally, it'll be over 80% by 2020. These are huge numbers, right? And they're going to be smartphones, and they're going to have these technologies developing. So, yes, are the machines taking our jobs? On a certain level, the machines are taking our jobs. And Peter and I don't deny this. There is an appendix in Abundance about the dangers of exponential technologies, and there's a chapter on jobs. And it is a big, big issue and exceptionally painful right now because we're in the trend. We're moving from a materials-based economy to an information economy. Now, there's huge advantages in an information economy. In a materials-based economy, and I'm going to quote Dean Kamen here, materials-based economy, if you got a hunk of gold and I got a watch and we trade, then you got a watch and I got a hunk of gold, and it's zero sum. We each got one thing. But if you got an idea and I got an idea and we trade, we each have two ideas. It's non-zero. So in an information-based economy, first of all, you need less materials to make a living, and everybody can win. We're moving in that direction, slowly, painfully, not very elegantly at all. And how long, is this transition going to take? I have no idea. I don't think anybody has any idea, and I think it can be, far more painful along the way. It is, there's some scary stuff out there, that said, the same growth curve that I just laid out for healthcare, education also built on the backs of AI, is moving in these same direction. We're getting amplification in water technology and food technology. And one of the things that a lot of people also miss is the challenges that we look at right now are scary. And one of the reasons they're scary is because they're interlocked, right? Water impacts health, it impacts education or employment, and blah, blah, blah. And they're all tightly nestled. The flip side is, so are the solutions. That's how Peter convinced me about population. He didn't show me data about population. He showed me data about what happened in Morocco when babies stopped dying from dirty water and population numbers drop. So these are, really, really intractable seeming problems like overpopulation. Oh my God, what do? You give people clean water. And we know how to do that. Dean Kamen's slingshot technology, which is already, in field trials with Coca-Cola, doing really well, I might add. Just had a conversation with somebody at DECA about this last week. Does a lot of really, solves a big chunk of the global water crisis. This is one technology. And, that in turn is going to solve a lot of these other crises. So the same reason we're terrified works to our benefit. The domino effect, happens in the solutions as well.
That's fantastic. So perhaps you can just repeat and elaborate a little more on those 4 factors that you think are going to bring about that abundance that you refer to in the book.
So the 4 forces, that we believe are driving us, the first of those is exponentially growing technology, right? And over the past, kind of since Moore's law wasn't actually the first exponential technology, but since Moore's law has been discovered, people have figured out that most information-based technologies, if not all, quickly strap themselves to exponential growth curves, right? Exponential growth curves are massive. They're deceptive also, but they're very, very, very explosive. And it's the reason that, a supercomputer that filled a room and cost $8 million in the 70s now sits in your pocket and costs less than 200, right? Same change, is hitting nanotechnology, AI, robotics, sensors, networks, on and on and on. So there's a lot of these technologies are going exponential right now, and that puts a tremendous amount of power into the hands of the individuals, which leads us to our second force, which is the newfound power of the DIY innovator. Today, for the first time ever, small groups of dedicated people can do what governments and large corporations used to do. And we saw this, the most clear example was somebody like Burt Rutan winning the X Prize. Here's a guy who sent a ship into space with 36 guys and $20 million. Still a lot of money, a lot of funding. But let's look at synthetic biology. This was Burt Rutan 10 years ago. Synthetic biology, as of 2007, you had kids, high school and college students in the iGEM competition who were producing real-world results, actual real vaccines that could be used against ulcers in the real world, things like that. So now suddenly, it went from, in less than a generation, it goes from guys like Burt Rutan taking on space race with millions of dollars to guys in their garages fighting, major ailments with almost no money. So the DIY innovator and the newfound power, that was our second force. Mm-hmm. The third force we're calling the techno-philanthropists, and it's the whole new breed of philanthropists. These are guys who don't want to build buildings in their honor. They want to take on grand challenges. You've got the most obvious examples: Bill Gates fighting malaria, the Omidars going for fighting for freedom, or put electricity into the third world. Jeff Skoll crusading against pandemics and fighting nuclear proliferation. These are only the most, obvious examples, but this is a group of people who made more money, in a shorter time than ever before. They reinvented industries before the age of 35, and now they're going after global grand challenges, and they're not just writing checks. We talked to a lot of people who talk about, what a difference it made when Bill Gates decides to go into, he can have a meeting with a leader of a foreign country, and he can go in there with a team and bring in the WHO and things like that. That's astounding. So the newfound power of the techno-philanthropists, who, by the way, seem really, really, really keen through social entrepreneurship in backing the DIY innovator. And our fourth force, which is probably the force we're most interested in, we're calling the rising billion, right? These are the 4 billion people at the bottom of the pyramid, the poorest of the poor, the people who are living on less than $2 a day, but they're suddenly coming online. Two things are happening. One, the past 15 years, a lot of companies have started to figure out how to do business at the bottom of the pyramid, right? There's been a giant revolution at the bottom of the pyramid in terms of how to do business there, and people are becoming very, very successful. Secondly, everybody's getting phones, so they're coming online. So now there's these new business, co-creative business models with the poorest of the poor at the same time that the poorest of the poor are being interconnected. They're joining the global conversation for the very first time.
So, Steven, abundance sounds absolutely fascinating, but let me bring a question that one of my viewers and listeners here on Singularity Weblog posed and see what you think about it. So, the gentleman's online handle is LD, and he says the following: I agree with the basic idea about abundance, but the sad fact is that we will not be able to create this better future society while we're living in the monetary system. Monetary system can only function when there is no abundance. In other words, only in a situation of scarcity. It is absurd but true. Abundance creates an economic crisis in the monetary system, and the only way of the system to start functioning properly again is to create scarcity. So what is your comment to that kind of a question?
My comment, and so I will openly admit there are a handful of topics, and this is right in the middle of it, that we chose not to deal with in abundance. That and even in the appendixes, that it was right there. But he is right, by the way. Everything we're talking about pushes very hard on traditional capitalism. Now, I would urge our LD to read a book called The Origin of Wealth, which is essentially an introduction to complexity economics. Traditional economics, as he points out, is based on the scarcity model. And it's based on a lot of things, by the way, that are no longer true. It's based on the rational actor theory as well, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Economics is well aware of the fact that, they basically created a model that they based on physics, and only half the laws of thermodynamics have been invented. And that's the problem you have right there, right? But and I think a lot of people are looking at this, and I think some people, I've got friends who are, experimenting with alternate currencies, and there's questions about Bitcoins, and there's a whole interesting future. And I do agree with you. I don't think it's a tear down the entire system. I do think, on a certain sense, I guess perhaps we were talking about something about a steady state economy on the bottom with a capitalistic free market economy built on top of it. I don't know if Peter would agree with me on that, but I think, something like that model may be what we're looking at. But it is definitely, I don't agree. His comment is, I think, historically false. I don't mean to be rude here, but if, what he was saying is true, well, we've made astounding advances in the past century on the backs of, faulty capitalism, as he describes it, right? And we've reduced I'm not saying there aren't billions of people living in back-breaking poverty today, but we've dented it. Poverty has been reduced more in the past 50 years than the previous 500 across the boards. And we've done this using capitalism. So, history itself says, hey, wait a minute, there's more to this story than we understand. I think complexity economics is a step in the right direction. I think really smart people are starting to think about this problem. This is a very new problem, right?
Yeah.
This whole idea that abundance is, you would have 10 years ago, this is nonsense. This is science fiction, right? It's only because of what exponential technology has done in the past decade that we're having this conversation. So these are very, very, very new problems that we're confronting for the very first time. So while I'm not dismissing any of the problems, I am dismissing the bleakness of the outcome and, just trying to wedge open the possibility space for something that we can't see coming.
Yeah, because to support my viewer, my commentary here for a little bit, I have to say, I think his question is going a little bit beyond the historical context here, but it's more future-oriented, and I'll give you a couple examples of my own personal life. I grew up in Bulgaria behind the Iron Curtain for the first 13 or 14 years of my life in communist Bulgaria. and after communism collapsed, we had hyperinflation. But what hyperinflation meant was that when I was in the army, I was a sergeant and I was getting paid 30 cents per month. But at the same time, we were living in an abundance of money. So one month I got paid $400. The other month I got paid $800. Next month I got paid $1,500, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, which is great. Problem is that 5,000 of our monetary units was equal to $1. So in a situation in which you have an abundance of something, it becomes meaningless to the point of it loses any value. And not only that, but the whole capitalistic system, as you pointed out, it's based in economics, is based on scarcity. It's based on the most efficient allocation of scarce resources. Sure. So, and the idea is that the market is the most efficient mechanism that we know of so far, which allocates those scarce resources. But then what happens when we have abundance? And that's, I think, the real key here is that I think just like, all the other previous economic systems had their time and place in history and had to go, perhaps we're just having a glimpse into the sort of the beginning of the end of capitalism. I don't know.
I think the exact same, we can have this exact same discussion about kind of, democracy, nation state based democracy as we know it. I always make this joke, but if you had to go to war tomorrow and you can pick as your ally Microsoft or Malaysia, you're going to take Microsoft. Right? If I give you 6 months to prepare for war, you'd much rather go to war with Microsoft getting your back than Malaysia. You've got companies so much larger than nation states at this point. I think all of these systems are under, significant duress, but I don't think that leads to disaster. It seems to lead to change, but I like our chances. I like what's going on. I find it really interesting. And, it's really a question of how much, this is another, by the way, cognitive bias that we call loss aversion, right? It's loss aversion, what keeps you stuck in ruts. You hold on to what you have for fear of change. And it's a very, very strong bias. In this particular case, I don't suffer from it. I like where we're going, even though it is going to be radically different from today. Yeah. But the other flip side, we're saying abundance. What we're really talking about, right, is basic necessities, providing basic necessities. Right now, air is free. We don't, it's not regulated, and it hasn't fallen apart. Is everything going to fall apart suddenly if, another basic necessity like water, is provided for free? I don't see the disaster. We're not talking about handing out free money. We're talking about, very affordable, low-cost energy, very things get interesting from there, right? You provide super cheap energy, and then suddenly a lot of things do become very, very abundant. But we're moving in this direction anyways. Information and communication are, which were a treasured, valued commodity. Think about how the whole traditional education system was built, right? You have to memorize as much information as you can cram into your head, and that's how we're going to judge your intelligence. Well, all that's gone. It's gone in the past 15 years, 10 years. That doesn't mean smart people are suddenly not undervalued and not, being employed because the internet gives us all the facts on demand. I don't see the correlations. I think there's too many moving parts to rush to judgment.
I see. Well, Steven, that's a fascinating topic, but I know your time is very valuable, so I'd have to bring our interview to a close here with the final 2 questions. So first of all, where can our viewers and listeners go and find more information about you and your work?
My website, www.stevenkotler.com. That's StevenKotler.com.
Thank you, and I'll definitely also post the link. But the final and perhaps most important question of my interviews traditionally is this. Is there a single point or a single most important message that you would like our viewers and listeners to take away from this interview with you today?
I'm going to leave you with, what is to Peter and me the most important message in abundance, which is what we're really talking about is massive amounts of personal empowerment. And we don't have to wait around anymore for other people to solve our problems. We can take matters into our own hands, solve them ourselves. We have the most astounding cooperative tools ever invented in history at our disposal. Massively powerful technologies are getting cheaper and cheaper every day. And this is our fight. It's our future. And, you can sit passively by and let it happen to you and complain. Get off the couch and do something. Right now, I think everybody, when you were a little kid, I distinctly remember there was a period of time I wanted to be Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi or, Jesus Christ. That was the level of impact. And it got beaten out of me like it got beaten out of everybody else who really wanted to change the world. But one of the things that, my time writing this book, my time around Singularity University, my time in this world has really, taught me, because suddenly it's not just me, it's a lot of other people that I'm meeting who wanted to be Gandhi, Luther, Martin Luther King, Jesus, take your pick. And suddenly they've rediscovered it because suddenly these tools are available to everybody. And, that's exciting. This is really happening. I don't think, I've always felt there's nothing. If I can learn it, somebody else can. I don't think there's anything all that special about me. If I can move in this direction, other people can. That's, to me, the message.
Steven,
get off the couch, change the world.
Say that again?
Get off the couch, change the world.
Oh, that's fantastic. Steven Kotler, thank you very much for taking time to be with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really fun.
Thank you.
Singularity.